When you start into the defensive shooting, right, we, of course, drill mindset into everything.
Yeah. Hey, welcome to Whiskey, Lead, and Steel, Feeling Turret While You Wait, the official podcast of Aggressive Defensive Solutions. This is Lee Curling, and I'm with him as usual. I'm Rick Sutton. Lee, what are we going to talk about tonight, man?
We're going to talk about falling in the trap of starting with defensive training, finding out competitive shooting is a wonderful tool, and rolling down the trap of only then doing the competitive shooting and thinking it's helping you defensively.
Yeah.
And it can, right?
Can.
But anyway, I mean, you got some thoughts when we were talking a little earlier.
Earlier this week I was having a chat with one of our clients, Gina, and her husband, John. And so we got talking about stuff, and one of the things that I've noticed, and we've had this conversation, obviously, us and Jeremy, the whole thing. So one of the things that happens is, and not picking on women, but I see this happening a lot with female clientele, is they decide, I want to get a gun for defensive purposes because I recognize that it's way easier than trying to lug a cop around all the time. So they go out and they get themselves a gun, and then they get some training because that's a great idea. And then somewhere in there, they find out that going to a competition does a number of things for you. It's a great test bed for your training regimen. It's a great test bed for your techniques and your tactics. And then it can be a lot of fun. And of course, it also brings you into another community, and it gives you the opportunity for cross-pollination of ideas. So it's a great thing. And I'm a big proponent of going and shooting in competitions because it helps to inoculate against stress. But one of the things that I see happening, and I notice this with some of the clients that we have, and you don't want anybody to become a cautionary tale, is so the example is that I've used is, okay, so I went out and I bought a Smith & Wesson M&P EZ, right? And that's what I'm going to carry because I can hide that on my body, and it's a full-size 9mm. It carries a full-size 9mm pellet, and away we go. And then they come out and they shoot a couple of matches with that, and they realize that while you can shoot a match with it, if you want to get competitive, right, maybe you want to do something else. So they go, oh, well, that looks really fun, and I'd like to do that. So then they end up buying themselves a good race gun, a race rig, and all those things. And there's nothing wrong with that. And then they focus on shooting in the competition. So get in the competition world. And they make the assumption, the quiet assumption that, well, I'm doing well in competitive shooting, so I must inherently be prepared for operational shooting.
When they've gone from an easy with a 3-inch barrel.
Yeah, and
right.
Yeah, a 9-round magazine.
Right, 9-round magazine that they were carrying in a concealed holster. They flipped over to a full-size, compensated, weighted Legion series SIG.
Yeah. With a ledge on it.
Right. But hey, I've enjoyed competitions. I was doing okay. In order to take it to the next level, you do get to the point where you go, let's face it, if you're carrying a Shield EZ and you're trying to shoot our steel at 35 yards, well, the gun makes a difference.
It does.
Right. We always say you're not going to outshoot your gun, but there are those times where the subcompact, to the full size makes a difference. Right. But you take that and then you get a competition rig, and your magazines are
everything's indexed completely differently.
Right. And you stop shooting your EZ. You stop drawing your EZ.
Yeah.
You just focus on that full size gun.
Yeah. And you focus not only on the full sighting distance, but you also focus on the trappings that come in with playing the game. There's nothing wrong with playing the game. I don't have any heartburn with that. And if somebody wants to go out here and, as we say, play high-speed pool, hey, more power to you. That's all well and good. Now, don't make the assumption that because you're the best driver at Motor World in a go-kart, that you are capable of high-speed response or pursuit driving in a major metropolitan area. Slightly different animal. And my concern then for so many of our clients is, look, as we say, the competitive world is freshwater and the operational world is saltwater, and there's plenty of brackish water in there. You just you got to remember, okay, if you're just swimming in the swimming pool, there aren't sharks in the swimming pool. So you got to take that into account as you look at your training process. And then the concern becomes, are you now degrading your operational setup because you're not practicing it? And I'm by no means the font of all things that are tactical, but one of the things that I did for years when I was shooting competitively and carrying a gun for a living was, I went, okay, the whole reason I'm going to competitions realistically is because I want to practice. I want to stress myself out and work on my technique, my skills to make me a better gunfighter operationally. So I competed out of the same rig that I carried on the street. I competed with the same gun that I carried on the street. Not a Glock fan. Shot a Glock as a competitor for about 8 or 9 years because that's what the department required me to carry. So that's what I trained with the most. So if that's what you're doing, just bear in mind that, you got to practice your operational stuff at least as much as you practice your high-speed pool stuff. Otherwise, your high-speed pool thing is gonna be what you try to do when things go, when you find yourself just to the left of bang. To that end, we joked about this. We talked about this. If what you do the most when you go to the range and you're getting ready for the buzzer to go off, so you're waiting for the stress, is you go through the breakdance routine, holster your weapon, make sure everything's good, check your ear pro, check your eye pro, get yourself, do the peacock fingers, and then get ready. And that's what you do every time before the buzzer goes off. You're not going to be able to do that when John Q. Shithead points a knife or a gun at you and goes, give me your shit. And if that whole process is part of your engagement routine, as we say in the military, we just interrupted your OODA loop.
Right.
And now you were already behind the curve. Now the curve is a quarter mile away from you.
Right.
And so the only way you can not have that happen is when you dedicate yourself and you go, okay, not a bad idea. If you're going to take your range gun to the range and you're going to practice your IPSC IDPA, USPSA, Second Saturday stuff, whatever it is, well, before you leave the range, box all that shit up, turn yourself in 3 circles, take your carry gun out, do a couple of draw strokes and a couple of fires with your carry gun, and then move off smartly. That's at least, I think, going to serve you in a little better stead. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the same thing, right? Or you mentioned something that I was thinking about, and that is the preparation mindset for competition is vastly different than the where you are on the combat continuum based on Cooper's color code.
Yeah.
Right. You're not at yellow when you're standing outside the box.
Nope.
Right. You're not on that sliding scale. No. You're kind of, I'm here, I'm waiting. You step in the box, you load, make ready, but how am I going to engage these targets? You've made all of that assessment, and then you're right. You go through your little kata, your little chi, your little whatever when you load and yeah, shooter's ready, right?
Yeah.
Right. And when we do training, right, it's just threat.
Yep.
Right. It is right. The
What is your oldest child's middle name? Threat.
right. The bad guy.
That not too long ago.
Yeah.
Right. The bad guy is not going. Are you ready? You ready? Okay. All right. All right. And let's go. Right. You're right. It's unless you stay in that defensive mindset. You're right. I think you're.
Yeah.
All right, let me get my stance right. Let me get my. Yeah. It's.
And I would make
Yeah.
it. I would venture a guess that you're not even in white. Standing outside the box.
Not really. Right?
No, because
You're BSing,
you're standing there shooting the shit with your friends.
You are because I don't want this to I don't want anyone to take that in a negative way, but right you're on a range, right? Everybody out there, most all, I'm not gonna say everybody, but most of our competitors, especially ones that have been there for a while, right? You are paying attention to what's going on around you. You are paying attention to the other competitors. You're paying attention from that safety aspect.
But you're not looking for threats.
But you're not right. You're the threat you're looking at is to make sure that I'm not walking into a bad area, or I'm not right. It's a wholly different thing,
Yeah.
right. Whereas in a defensive standpoint, it's that constant what if. What happens next?
Yep.
What happens if mom loses control of the baby carriage as I'm driving down Virginia Beach Boulevard, right?
Yeah.
Am I going to swerve out of the way? Is there a car beside me? Am I able to slam on brakes? At what point am I not going to be able to slam on brakes? Right. And then nothing happened. What's the next thing? Is that light going to change? At what point, if the light changes, it's those weird little random
I had it earlier today in New County.
Yeah, nothing to do with guns, firearms, or really bad things. It's just what it is.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course the what we always talk about when we're talking about Cooper's color code and being in white, being in yellow, orange, and red, and the running joke has always been, well, when you're in your house getting ready to watch your favorite show with your favorite drink, that's when you're super relaxed. Well, if you're on a facility that is guarded and you had to go through a background check to get aboard, and you're with a bunch of people that you know and are your friends, you are essentially at a barbecue, right? It's like,
Yeah.
we do our best at Second Saturday to make it enjoyable and fun, but we also want it to be like hanging out with a bunch of your friends. The difference is that, you're not getting in the pool, you're stepping up the box and shooting. Right. But when you're not shooting, most everybody, from what I've seen, most everybody who is not shooting or on deck is enjoying themselves in a social setting.
Right.
So you'd be in white, which makes sense. Absolutely. And that's a very different thing. I know that from my standpoint, my focus and my conditional thinking on Second Saturday changes when I get in my car to leave. It's just like when I get in my car to leave the farm, it's kind of like that whole thing where you cross the wire. All right. I was someplace that I'm relatively certain I was going to be safe. Now I'm going someplace that I'm not certain I'm going to be safe. So we up the ante on that. And I think it's important that, from time to time, we just remind ourselves and remind everybody else out there, shooting in a competition is helpful.
Oh yeah.
But it's not the only thing. I mean, prime example of that, we've talked about this in the past. The guy who was on the pilot episode of Miami Vice, world IPSC shooter at the time, I think 3 years in a row, 2 years later, got robbed at halitosis distance and emptied his 1911 and did not hit the bad guy, emptied it so fast that the bad guy just ran off.
Right.
Because that guy had never processed, somebody could point a gun at me. So, yeah.
Because it's a different thing.
It's an entirely different thing.
Right. It's the brown cardboard target is a wholly different thing than the barrel of a weapon.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. There is a huge difference. Yes. There is a huge difference between lining up to shoot a cardboard target that you know or you have a pretty good idea where it is, as opposed to making a entry or coming around the corner in the real world with a live gun in your hand, someplace where there may or may not be somebody who intends to do you harm.
Right.
Those are two very, very different things. And if you've never done both of them, it might be difficult to not make the correlation.
Right. Oh no,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. That's a
Yeah.
yeah. So, not one to beat up, really. I mean, as far as subject, I mean,
No,
it's
But there's also a difference in mindset.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how much of that you really guys got into is the mindset.
Mindset for combative as opposed to, oh, well, yeah, absolutely.
yeah, you're right. As you
You talked about skill levels, but
Yeah.
mechanical skills, but not
Yeah, mindset is,
mindset.
yeah.
and you're right. So when you start into defensive shooting, right, we of course drill mindset into everything.
Yeah.
And if you begin to move out of training for defensive shooting and you flip into that competition shooting, I do think, right, it's right, the downrange, idea is very different between those two. And you're right, you could definitely lose sight from a mindset standpoint that when you pick up your gun to walk out of the house and all you have been doing and or training and or has been competition related.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole mindset could
Well,
could
and,
grow.
and
And I'm going to go. You go into the whole Cooper color code thing, right? You go into the whole aspect of defensive shooting can begin to slip if you flip, right? If you flip that switch into competitive, only doing the competitive shooting and not doing defensive training.
And I think one of the telling concepts to that would be, and we ask this all the time, if somebody asks you, well, how much time do you have to get 3 rounds on target? And your answer is, well, typically I can typically draw and fire and get them in about 3.1 seconds. That's a great competitive answer. But if somebody goes, well, how much time do you have to get the rounds on the target? And your answer is, oh, the rest of my life.
Right.
And it doesn't matter. And where I came from that was when I would go to competitions and go shoot, understand, of course, step in the box, load, make, ready. My thought was not, oh, this is an L-Prez. I have to shoot this L-Prez clean in a par time of 10 seconds. I stepped into the box and went, okay, I got the rest of my life to get this drill done because there's a real world application to this. And so it's a very nuanced difference in mindset, but while it's nuanced, I think it's extremely important, and if you, the analogy there is, if you go to the track and the goal is, well, I need to get around the track in the shortest time possible to win the time trials today, that's a different mindset than, well, it's 4 o'clock in Alexandria and there was a 10-100 officer needs assist, and I'm 5 miles away. How do I get there as quickly as possible without hurting or killing anybody on the way so I can do some good?
Oh, that's like 3 hours away though in Alexandria at that time of the day.
Not in a Tahoe. 'Cause you go up over the curb. If you're in a Dodge, you're fucked. Yeah. But yeah, and you're absolutely right. Amy's on the money on that. The mindset aspect of that. And I was having the conversation. This was a bleeding conversation that occurred with not only Juan Perez, but also with John Gallo. When we start talking about fighting, right? So why do you go shoot in a competition? To prep you for a gunfight. Mm-hmm. Why do you take martial arts? Kind of to prep you for a fight. Juan was telling me he was listening to a podcast on a guy. He goes, yes, I'm listening to this guy. And the guy said some stuff. And I thought, that sounds exactly like the stuff Rick said. I said, well, is this guy an asshole? And he goes, no. I said, well, then that sounded like him. But he said what he was talking about was there was a guy who, and I don't know who the podcaster is, but it's a guy who had been in the military and been a cop someplace. Mm-hmm. He'd have a conversation with a guy from Europe who was a European karate champion. And they were discussing fighting. And the cop, of course, was not a karate practitioner. He was a street fighter and a little bit of mixed martial arts, but mostly just street fighting. He said, and this karate guy seemed to get offended and go, you're making it sound like what I do isn't important and it isn't real. And this guy's point, and I wholeheartedly agree with this, it's not that it's not real. It's applicable, but it's very, very different in that if you and I go to Clark's dojo and square up on the mat, there is the expectation that you're using karate and I'm using karate, which means we both have relatively the same skill and knowledge, which means that part of the deciding factor on who wins and loses is your ability to predict what I'm going to do and react to what I'm going to do. And we both agree, we both understand that I'm not trying to knock you out. You're not trying to knock me out. Even in a tournament, neither one of us is trying to cause the other one to, live in a fucking wheelchair the rest of their life. Right. And if you get to whipping my ass too much, if I tap you, you'll quit.
Right.
And if I'm so fucked up I can't tap you, the ref will tackle you off of me. The difference there is, if I tell you on the street, dude, you're under arrest and you're going to jail, and you decide I either need to break contact or I need to fuck this guy up to the point where he can't take me to jail, that takes on a life and death emergency right then and there, because nobody is tapping out. Because if you're John Q. Bad Guy and you're beating the shit out of me, I can't tap out of that. Mm-hmm. And I have always fought people till the fight was over, right? So it's a whole different animal. And it's not to say that somebody who knows something about martial arts isn't a formidable opponent, but it's a difference of mindset and it's a difference of preparedness. Because if you and I are both, having a fight on the mat and I get you on the ground, I'm not going to stomp on your head.
Right. There's an end.
But if we're out in the middle of the road and one of us is a good guy, one of us is a bad guy, you could run the risk of getting your head stomped in. And because of that also, I think that changes the mindset about how the fight goes on. An example of that was, we already know, we've already talked about the fact that the longer the fight goes on, no matter what kind of fight it is, the longer the fight goes on, the greater the risk to you. Mm-hmm. So my goal the whole time I was a police officer was, I want to end this fight as quickly as possible. I want to limit the risk to me, and quite honestly, I want to limit the risk to the arrestee, the guy that I'm fighting. Because I don't want to cripple this guy, I don't want to bludgeon this guy, I don't want to beat him into a coma, but he's got to go to jail. He's got to get handcuffed, that's the end of it.
Because the reality is, the more injury you cause to him, the greater your exposure is to some downstream lawsuit.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
he deserved to be crippled because he's trying to kill me, and I cripple him. You're still going to deal with the lawsuit.
Exactly. And so, so you looked for the quickest, most efficient way to do it. Often, it didn't look bad, but it was pretty bad. You know, and my going trick typically was to hit somebody in the solar plexus as hard as I could, and then make use of the fact that I was a wrestler, and hit them in the chest, and then ride them to the ground. That way, when they hit the ground with my 200 pounds on them, all of the air came out of their lungs. And if you don't know this, people whose lungs are completely empty typically don't fight really hard very much.
So solar plexus is always always a great.
Yeah. And then, but the example that I used for Juan, I don't know that he's old enough to remember this one, you will, was the 4 guys who put really not much of an ass whipping on Glenn Rodney King. Stacy Kuhn, long before they got in trouble, wrote all of them up because he was on scene, and what he said was, you were taught by LAPD to hit this guy with everything you had, and you guys kept tapping him. If you'd have just hit him, he'd have stayed down and we'd have cuffed him, and that'd have been the end of it. And oddly enough, the Simi Valley jury said, well, yeah, every time you wailed on him and he became compliant, you quit hitting him, and then you'd approach him and he'd jump up to fight you again. If you'd have hit him fucking hard the first time, we wouldn't have this problem. So I think there is a lot to be said for that. And I think that there's, and one of the things we always talked about was, what looks worse? One good solid hit and the fight's over, or tap, 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 tap. So all of that plays into the mindset. So we've gone a little bit of far afield, but I think it's all relative.
But to that point, right? When you get into the defensive mindset, you said it earlier, you're in the fight till the fight is over.
Yes.
When you flip over into competitive, well, I'm only firing 6 rounds. I'm only firing 12 rounds. Everything is, oh, okay. I'm done. Show clear. Right. So there is a massively different mindset along those lines. And you're right. It is, you can go far afield if you get wrapped into the competitive shooting mentality when you should be in an operational shooting mentality.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. To that end, one of the things that I see happening a lot at competitions is drop the mag, or put the mag in the mag pouch, rack the slide, catch the round out of the air, and then press the trigger. If that's what you do all the time, and then you find yourself in a defensive position, defensive shooting situation, and when you're done, you inherently point the gun downrange and press the trigger. Here's how I know that's a problem. The police department used to teach at the end of the course, drop your slide, drop your magazine, rack your slide, point downrange, press the trigger, holster an empty gun. We had enough bangs after that what they said was, drop your slide, drop your mag, rack your slide 3 times, lock it to the rear, show it to the human being on either side of you, and then holster your gun with the slide locked to the rear. If you watch the Miami Vice pilot, where that guy does the shooting, it's amazing. They couldn't get the guy to go. He was supposed to walk up and execute a dude. You probably remember this. The setup on this is the guy who's a world-class IPSC shooter is playing a hitman, and he walks up to a guy outside of a hotel, and he shoots the guy, and then he walks away. Well, they had to shoot the scene like 3 times. Firstly, because he was so fast that they couldn't catch that he had fired 8 rounds. It just looked like he went like that. So nobody saw what it was. So they caught it, and then they slowed it down, and then they slowed it down again. But then the other thing that they could not get him to not do is he shot, dropped his mag, racked the slide 3 times. Pavlovian response. Couldn't get him to not do it. So then they made it part of the scene and he throws the gun in the trash can. That's what we call a range scar. And a range scar might be something that becomes a humorous anecdote between you and your friends, or a range scar could be a thing that causes somebody to get hurt, or it could cost you a fight in the real world. So that's something to think about. Anything else? I think those were good rabbit holes, though. I mean, I don't think we like talked about Scarlett Johansson or Katie Sackhoff or anything.
Until now.
We're not talking about it, but that is a recurring theme typically.
It's a recurring theme for somebody.
Hey.
All right. Hey, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week.
Be safe. I was on the pilot episode of Miami Vice, world IP6 shooter at the time, I think 3 years in a row. 2 years later, got robbed at halitosis distance and emptied his 1911 and did not hit the bad guy.